Hello everyone, welcome to this flipped classroom lesson about American westward expansion. If you could all take your note sheet out with you as we go through this lesson, there'll be some blanks for you to fill in to make sure we have all the information, and also 4 questions for you to answer as we go through this. And feel free at any time to pause this recording, to restart it, to rewind it, whatever helps you learn the information best. So without further ado, let's get started looking about how America expanded out to the west. The first big event in this expansion was something called the Louisiana Purchase. Now today Louisiana is a state in America, but back in the early 1800s it was a really large area that was owned by France. And Thomas Jefferson, we learned a little bit about him already. He became America's 3rd president after John Adams. Remember, Thomas Jefferson was a Republican as opposed to a Federalist, and as a Republican, he liked having small governments, national governments that don't do a lot of stuff. So he defeated Adams, and now him and the Republicans are in power. However, in 1803, he got this great offer to buy the Louisiana Territory from the French. The French said, "We'll give you this huge area of land." You can see it here how big it is. This entire green area is Louisiana. In comparison, this red area was the size of America before Louisiana. So the French said, "We'll give you this huge area of land. It'll about double the size of the country. We'll give it to you for 4 cents an acre." And Jefferson said, "Wow, this is a great deal. This is a great bargain. I've got to do this because it's going to really help the country out." Now Jefferson was a little bit concerned about this because he liked small national government, and he wasn't sure that the Constitution even allowed him to buy Louisiana. So by buying Louisiana, he would be really expanding the government's power. And as a small government Republican, this was something Jefferson wasn't really sure about. But even though he wasn't sure, he did decide to buy Louisiana because it was such a good deal. He couldn't resist. He said, "I've got to do this." However, this brings up, we've been talking a lot about this debate between a more powerful government and a less powerful government. This continued on throughout America. It's still a debate today. So it's important to keep in mind that even though this lesson and this unit is going to focus a lot more on America expanding to the west and what that did to the country, it's important to remember that the debate between big government and small government is still going on too, even if we're not going to look at it as closely during this unit. So it's also, I'm curious, what do you think? Do you think buying Louisiana was a good idea? Do you think the benefits outweighed the drawbacks to this? So we're going to look now what happened after we bought Louisiana. And one thing that happened really quickly was that Thomas Jefferson really wanted to see what was in this new territory, what was in all of this land out to the west. And a couple of people named Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, they became the Lewis and Clark expedition. This Lewis and Clark group of travelers who went out to the west to see what was there, what kind of nature was there, what kind of animals were there, what kind of land was there. And they said, "We're going to travel out to the west and just see what's in all this big area here." And they got help on this expedition, especially from a Native American named Sacagawea. She was a Native American woman who knew the land very well already, because even though this land was new to Americans, Native Americans had been living on it for a very long time, so it wasn't so new to them. So Sacagawea helped guide Lewis and Clark and the other travelers to show them more about this new land, this land that was new to America, but not so new to the Native Americans. And this journey was very exciting. They made it all the way to the west coast, all the way to the very western far side of America, what became America. And over time, this expedition made Americans more aware and more excited about the West and everything that was out there. And it's still something that's really captured the imagination of Americans today, this journey. You can see here in 2003, there was even a gold dollar, a gold coin with Sacagawea on it to commemorate the journey and her important part in it. And so it's really been something that's captured the imagination of Americans for a long time. And over time, with this new land to the west, Americans began to talk about something called manifest destiny. You can think about it, ever since the first colonists really came to America, Americans have been moving farther west, whether that's west coming from England to the colonies here, or now west moving out to the Louisiana territory, and even farther west out to the west coast here. And Americans began to think, it's our destiny, it's our fate, it's our obvious destiny. Our manifest kind of means obvious. So they're saying it's our obvious destiny that we're going to expand across this entire continent. The continent's going to look like this with the big American flag over the whole thing. We're going to expand from sea to shining sea, and this entire continent is going to be America. A lot of people were very enthusiastic about this. So why, though, did Americans want to go west? It's nice that they wanted the whole country, the whole continent, really, to be part of America. But what specific reasons led individual people to say, I'm going to leave my home in the east, I'm going to travel out to the west? There were a lot of reasons why, really. And we're going to look at a couple key ones. And also, as we do this, think about what reason you might have for moving west if you were living during this time. So one reason was wealth and fame. Adventurers and traders, people who were trying to make money by trading or just go on adventures, these were some of the first people in America to move out to the west. One major example of this a little bit later on was the California Gold Rush. And California is today a big state on the west coast. And in 1848 and 1849, gold was discovered in California, which led to a lot of adventurers and people trying to make money, traveling out to California to try to get that gold. And this is still another big thing in popular culture today. The San Francisco 49ers football team, San Francisco, California, is named the 49ers because 1849 was a big year for people traveling out to the gold rush. So you can see the impact this has had even on popular culture today. Another major reason people traveled west was for a better life. And many settlers, like families who were living on the East Coast, said, let's go out west, settle out there, and maybe we'll have a good opportunity to have a better life, to have more land, to have the ability to farm and get our own food, and just live a comfortable life. And so this was very difficult, and a lot of people had trouble making a comfortable life in this brand new area, or at least new to Americans. But many people tried it, and many of them took something called the Oregon Trail. Oregon, which is today a state out of the northwest here. A lot of people said, we're going to travel to the Oregon country, the Oregon territory up here. And there'll be some space here we can start a new life. So this Oregon Trail, and also other trails that people would follow, became key kind of roads that led people out west. And eventually in 1848, this Oregon territory became part of America. We weren't really quite sure who owned it back then, but eventually us in England decided to make a treaty, and we said, okay, the part of Oregon in this area is going to be part of America, and it still is today. Another reason people went west was religious freedom. And one example of this is the Mormons, which is a branch of Christianity. And a lot of Mormons back during this era were not treated well in the East Coast. A lot of people didn't like the religion. So a lot of these Mormons, led by people like Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, said, we're going to move out west, where we'll be able to practice our religion without people criticizing us and threatening us. For example, Joseph Smith was even murdered in the East because people didn't like his religion. So the Mormons wanted to find someplace safe where they could practice their religion. And what's interesting about this is that fame and fortune, starting a new life, getting religious freedom. Now, these were a lot of the reasons people moved west, but they were also a lot of the reasons that people moved to the American colonies in the first place. So it's interesting that the same reasons that led people to move to the colonies back in colonial days also led people to move out west later on. So it's kind of a continuation of this movement west. Another major event in this westward expansion was the Mexican-American War. You can see this large area of land that America acquired in this war. This was a war between America and Mexico. One major cause of the war was that America said, okay, Texas, which is a state today in this area, they said, Texas, we're going to make you part of America. And previously, Texas was kind of an independent country that had tried to break away from Mexico, because they were originally actually part of Mexico. And Mexico did not like America saying, Texas, you're part of America now. So Mexico said, we're going to not allow this to happen. We're really angry at you. Eventually, these two angry countries fought a war with each other, America and Mexico. Very controversial in America, because people said, why are we fighting Mexico? We don't need a war for this. It's not fair. There's no good reason to start this war. But they did fight the war, and America ended up getting a lot of land and winning this war by a lot. And so America got a lot more land to help with westward expansion during this time. And we can think about positives and negatives that came out of this Mexican-American War. Now, we've been talking a lot about westward expansion from the perspective of Americans, but it's also important to think about this from the perspective of Native Americans, people who have been living on this land for a long time. And we can see in this little picture here, in this little graphic, that in the 1700s, most of what we think of as America was Native American land. But over time, it became less and less and less as Americans continued to expand into it, until today, when we can see from this huge area to begin with, it getting smaller and smaller and smaller as Americans expanded here. And now today, there's almost no green left, almost no Native American land left. So while we think of this as being westward expansion for Americans, Native Americans would see it very differently. They certainly would not call it westward expansion. They'd think of it as westward contraction. And now there were some places where Native Americans and Americans lived in peace, but in other places there were wars between the two sides, and also many natives died of disease. So this was a very difficult time for Native Americans. Americans might see it as a time when they were expanding west, expanding the country, but Native Americans saw it very differently. One example of this is the Trail of Tears. This was an event in the mid-1800s when Andrew Jackson, who was the president of America at the time, forced many Native Americans to move out of their homes that they might have been living in for hundreds of years, for very long times. And he said, you know, a lot of white Americans, they want this land. They want this land for farming or to build things on. So land in places like Georgia or other southern or northern states, we've got to get the Native Americans out of this land so that white Americans can have it. And this wasn't the only time natives were forced to move like this, but it was certainly one of the most controversial and one of the biggest. And this was what Andrew Jackson said was, since we have to move the natives out of this land, we're going to have them all move to this new area out west. This journey, though, was very difficult, and many Native Americans suffered and died on it. In fact, the journey for one specific Native American tribe, the Cherokee tribe, was called the Trail of Tears, which really shows us how difficult and how sad this journey was for natives. And this gives us an example of how the Native Americans may have seen this era of manifest destiny. And we can really think, while Americans saw manifest destiny one way, how might Native Americans have seen this? And over the next coming days in class, we're going to look more at how Native Americans and Americans had very different perspectives. We're going to try to put ourselves in the shoes of these two sides and see what they thought about this time in history and why they felt this way. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great day.